Hello, everyone, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and I am here with Hannah Wallen and Lauren Brooks, and this is HBR Talk number 227. Harvey Weinstein granted appeal? What does this mean? Well, we're going to be looking at some breaking news regarding Harvey Weinstein's case and essentially the root, the progenitor of the Me Too movement and the Me Too hashtag, and where things are because surprise, surprise, um, it's not exactly like being widely reported, you know. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about it. Should I'm gonna bring up the NBC article first? Is that fair, guys? Or
That's probably the most informative one,
yeah. Okay. So
or the
let's
most complete.
yeah. So let's take a look. So the title of this article is Harvey Weinstein granted appeal in New York rape conviction. All right. Harvey Weinstein. Hold on. This NBC website is crazy. Harvey Weinstein has been granted an appeal by the New York State Court of Appeals, which means his 2020 rape conviction could possibly be vacated or modified. The decision was made by Chief Judge Janet DiFiore, who said the top court will hear arguments from Weinstein's defense lawyers and the district attorney on whether the convicted movie mogul deserves a new trial. Weinstein was granted what is called a criminal leave application, and the next step is for attorneys to file briefs. Oral arguments are expected sometime in 2023, according to a court spokesman. The arguments will be before the entire court. All right. Before I continue, I guess like the first thing people might be curious about is what does this mean that he's basically granted an appeal? So let me just be like the Watson here and uh ask you guys like what does this mean so far, what I've read so far?
So, being granted an appeal means that the court found that he might have cause to have his case overturned, that there were potential flaws in his case. The court's not saying that he's going to win his appeal, just that he has demonstrated a reasonable cause to argue for his case to be overturned. And the article kind of explains what that cause was. But basically, if you're convicted of something and the case is solid, like there's video of you doing it, you're accused of murdering somebody and you're on video stabbing them to death, and from 17 angles or something, like, and you try to appeal, it's almost impossible to get an appeal of your conviction based on that, unless the video was illegal, and then maybe, but with something like this, what happened, what's described in this article, this is a little bit more egregious of a violation than getting you on something that you did for sure, by means that were sneaky or something. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this case, because a lot of times when a judge says, yeah, there's cause to re-examine this, re-examining it eliminates evidence that was used or things that were called evidence, as evidence, and the case falls apart. So
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I guess we'll get into the more of the details. This was just so that we're all on the same page as to like what it means when you know when we hear that Harvey Weinstein was granted an appeal by the New York State Court of Appeal. Um, okay. Weinstein attorney Arthur Aidala told NBC News, quote, "We are grateful that Chief Judge DeFiore acknowledged the unique legal issues in this case, and we are hopeful the entire court will find that Mr. Weinstein did not receive a fair trial and they will reverse his conviction," end quote. Aidala says he spoke to Weinstein to relay the news, and Weinstein remained steadfast in his innocence. The attorney has argued that the trial judge made several errors, such as allowing too many witnesses, some of whom did not directly relate to the sexual assault charges. He also asked whether a juror failed to reveal the nature of her writings about sex predators. So
Yeah, no, that's not important at all. No,
yeah,
it wouldn't cloud her judgment about this guy at one bit, right? No,
So
go ahead.
yeah, I want to point out the allowing too many witnesses thing is glossing over a big deal. They
Yeah.
weren't just too many witnesses. What the judge allowed was a bunch of women who had not formally accused Weinstein, who had not filed complaints with police, or who waited until after the statute of limitations to do so. So their complaints were not vetted, right? He didn't get tried and found guilty or tried and acquitted. He was not tried on these charges, these complaints, because there were no charges. But he let them come in and make criminal allegations as part of their testimony without any standard for evidence. So their testimony is just taken as evidence, and that's allowing a man to be painted a certain way, like the waters to be poisoned, and a bias to be created in the jury by simply flooding him with allegations. So he's being tried on a whole bunch of allegations, but he only has the right to challenge one of them.
Yeah, I see. And of course,
so that just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and the purpose of all of these, so, well, I don't even know if I want to call them witnesses, but essentially allegations, is specifically to bias the judge and the jury. Because if if you get like however many it was, like 20 women, and none of them have ever filed a police report, none of them have ever filed a complaint to whatever his company, like nothing like this, no history of this at all, and then all of a sudden they all have a similar story, and it's used. The only seeming purpose of it is to essentially delegitimize his defense, and it works. Then they basically get what they want. So that I think that this is interesting, because if he can essentially like remove any of these extraneous allegations that don't really, it's just something that women are saying, like they're not filing anything official, they're just saying, oh, it's like it's basically like they're behaving like character witnesses to damage his character. So he may actually be able to overturn this. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that I'm on the same page as well. So too many
but
witnesses.
Lauren was saying something about the bias that I think I interrupted.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
I was talking but this juror that wrote the book, that's about sex predators. Of course, it's going to bias.
Oh yeah, sure.
Her judgment, and it's crazy.
Is that author mentioned in this article? Because we're gonna have to.
Yeah, that was part of that paragraph. He also asked whether a juror failed to reveal the nature of her writing about sex predators. So what's really significant about this is she failed to disclose that. That took away the right of the accused to have his attorney challenge her as a juror and ask that she be removed from the jury on the basis of a bias. Right. So it almost doesn't matter whether she was biased or not. They don't have to prove that she was biased. They just have to prove that he was denied the right to challenge her as biased. That's my understanding. You're not allowed to hide information like that. If you're asked about any potential biases, like if I was going into jury duty and the prosecuting attorney asked me, is there anything that you think might bias you in this case, I would have to admit, well, I'm a due process advocate that believes in jury nullification. Like, that probably would get me taken off the jury. But if I didn't admit it, and then the prosecutor came out later and said, well, you didn't admit this, and I should have had the right to challenge you as a juror, then I might be in trouble, or it might screw up the case for the defendant.
Yeah. And the fact that this one juror is like an activist for and writes about sexual assault charges. So that's pretty like in line with what this case is dealing.
Yeah, it's like in your face, like that's exactly what the case is about.
Kind of obvious.
How the hell did they miss that?
Or at least those are the allegations. But anyway, in a statement, Weinstein maintained that he is innocent of these charges, and I am so grateful to my attorneys for working hard and smart on this. Their hard work will help me prove my innocence in the end. I look forward to this opportunity to be heard by the New York Court of Appeals. End quote. The full court could either affirm the lower court's decision and uphold the conviction, reverse the decision and vacate his conviction and order a new trial, or modify by upholding some charges and vacating others. That New York's top court agreed to take the appeal is rare in itself. The chief judge herself, who is set to step down at the end of August after she announced her resignation in a letter to colleagues in July, signed off on the court hearing the appeal. Does anyone want to say anything about what I've read so far?
The fact that it's unusual does underscore the validity of the complaint.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, reading out the possibilities of what could potentially happen, I think what's most likely to happen is that, they would modify some of the charges. I just don't see them.
A complete reversal?
No.
You don't?
I don't see it happening.
Maybe.
But I think it would, if that did happen, then it would go back to trial. And I think that would just be even a bigger shit show.
Yeah, it all depends on what other evidence they have. Like, if they base their entire case on, well, it's not just this woman, these other 20 women are accusing him too. But you don't get to hear any exculpatory evidence. He doesn't get to present any exculpatory evidence in regard to their allegations because they're not the accuser. Then, if you eliminate all of those accusations and they have nothing else, he may be acquitted. Because what else can they do? But if they have other evidence, if there's physical evidence of contact and the accuser says, no, I did not consent, then he would have to prove consent under current law in order for him to be acquitted. And it's a lot harder to prove that.
Yeah, that's not a good situation to be in. I think it's possible. The thing is, I haven't been following it recently, so I don't know if what the evidence is. But from my understanding is that it's all basically just hearsay, most of the case, and they allowed for other women to bring in their allegations, and then you have the media in the way that they're covering things. Someone in the chat asked if he's gonna be able to win in the court of public opinion. That's an easy no. What he's done. The court of public, that's over. Unless he completely turns it around and it turns out that he's completely innocent of all the charges and this whole this whole thing ended up harming him, maybe harm his health or something. Unless he does that, then no, it's not going to change. And even if he does, it probably still isn't going to change because the media, again, they're not going to really report on it unless they have a way to report on it so that it looks like, he just got away with it because he's a man or because he's rich and he lined, people's palms or whatever, and basically made, because that's like the narrative, the fantasy that
Yeah.
a lot of these people believe is like, rich people can do whatever they want, and they never have to deal with consequences. They just pay people off. It's all so evil, but it's kind of cartoonish because that obviously is just not always the case. And you can think whatever you want about Harvey Weinstein the man, but that doesn't change the fact that there's a lot of sketchy shit going on in this trial, and it's like we have this bias like baked into us, that when we hear about stuff like this, we just side with the woman, and so he's never gonna get out from under that because too many people are just gonna be like, he got away with it. He's rich. Rich people suck. Whatever.
Well, there's two things that are gonna be rough for him. There's that tendency, and then the second tendency is if people hear the same thing over and over again, there's a tendency in your ordinary average person that isn't vigilant about maintaining an understanding of objective reality versus what they've been influenced to believe, that will just start believing a thing because they've heard it over and over again.
Yes.
And feminists and advocates for accusers, basically, which progressives, some conservatives are like this as well. So this isn't, it's hard to just blame this on one group, but it's essentially gynocentric people. Because they don't advocate the same for male accusers, right? But they will repeat the narrative about Weinstein, even if he is conclusively proved innocent.
Yeah.
Which I don't expect that to happen, but I mean, it could very much be like the Kavanaugh case, or if you remember the Kavanaugh case, the allegations against Kavanaugh kind of disintegrated. He had his main accuser, and her allegations weren't based on any evidence. She just was emotional. Like her whole body of evidence was how emotional she was about her story. And the other accusers, their allegations fell apart like a castle made out of sugar left out in the rain. Like it was bad. It was ridiculous. And he still gets, like, if you see publications that are more progressive, or you see publications that are more left-leaning in general, they will still talk about him as a rapist that got away with it. Like they don't even
they totally do. They totally do.
Yeah, they don't even acknowledge what happened in his hearing as valid. And if you debate politics on any social media, you will run into feminists and supporters of like the accuser narrative and everything that will talk about him like it was conclusively proved in his hearing that he was a rapist, and then Congress just let him get away with it anyway because he was a Trump nominee. And they'll do the same thing with Trump, even though Trump has never been convicted of anything. I've had people tell me he's a convicted rapist, and I'll say, can you link me to the news article that shows that he was convicted of anything? Because he hasn't been convicted of anything. Nope. He hasn't even been vetted, right? There's no, most of the allegations that they came up with to throw at him missed by a mile. There were details that pretty much destroyed the allegations. So like this kind of thing, it doesn't stop the narrative from continuing. And
exactly,
with that narrative continuing, eventually you get this, this movement of this person's individual Overton window, where their reputation is rapist, even though it was either not proved or even proved that they were not, because the narrative keeps getting repeated over and over again. That happened to Bill Cosby. That happened to who did we just talk about? Roy Moore,
Brett Kavanaugh,
right? Kavanaugh,
Donald Trump, Michael
Bill
Jackson.
Clinton. Like there was Bill
Harvey
Clinton
Weinstein.
was never proved guilty of rape either.
Yeah, Bill Clinton.
But to this day, you will hear conservatives that will, Absolutely, 100%. Well, he was proved guilty of rape. Really? Who proved it?
Yeah,
What hearing can you cite that shows he was proved guilty of rape? All
exactly.
he was proved guilty of was having an affair,
Yeah.
which, you can judge him for that if you want to, but it's not rape. It was consensual
Yep.
with an adult.
What they mean to say is that they approve that he is a rapist. Like they approved of the idea.
Exactly.
It's not a literal
the idea.
fact.
Like,
Yeah.
there are plenty of things I don't like about Bill Clinton, but that's not something that I can argue that he was a rapist. In fact,
Yep.
the woman that they're claiming it was proof that he was a rapist and a sexual harasser and all that, actually went to Washington D.C. to get her, what did she say, her presidential wings or something like that. She said to a friend, so she went there intentionally to flirt with the president and get into his pants, and now plays victim of that whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the narrative ends up getting spun.
Yeah, and I think this is just really, it's a very old tactic. Wasn't there like something involving JFK?
Yeah, JFK and Maryland. There was Gary
JFK
Hart
and
in the
Maryland
80s.
Monroe. Yeah.
Yep. Hart, I think, was completely ousted from the presidential race because he was caught having an affair. And again, it wasn't, I don't think that it was an underage situation. It was just an affair.
Yeah. So anyway, this is an old pattern, and I know it's not easy for people to, especially when you're talking about someone you might just not like. It can be really hard to like parse that out and say, you know what, I don't like this person, I don't agree with them in this way or that way, whatever. But we are just talking about the case, so that's the thing that matters. Because if you like allow space for people to make allegations by essentially saying, well, I could see it, even though there's no evidence, you're kind of contributing to this pattern of let's all just point the finger and act like this guy did this thing because we can destroy him and we don't like him anyway. And I say, even if you don't like him, you should defend his right to due process. It's very important, because if it happens to you, if it happens to a good person that doesn't deserve it, even if they're like, let's say, not karmically bad, because, a part of me thinks that for Harvey Weinstein, for example, this is like, could call it karma, but I don't think that makes it just. So, let his reputation be destroyed. He's probably not going to be able to get it back, because, no matter what happens with this case, no one's going to want to work with him ever again, because he's got the stinky cheese fingers or whatever. Yeah, he's got the cooties.
Cheese touch.
He's got the cheese touch.
For the millennials, he's got the cheese touch. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, go ahead.
I think what we're talking about is perfectly summed up in one of the comments that I read in one of the other articles, a Deadline article. And there was about 5 comments, right? And one of them goes, literally, this is exactly what he said, verbatim. I still have no idea what he did that was illegal. He might be a terrible guy, but Trump has done far worse.
Oh, yeah, right.
What planet do you don't even know?
No.
Presumably you read the article, which obviously he didn't, because then you might know what the hell the guy is being accused of.
Yeah.
But then to just, what Trump is living rent free, real estate baron living rent free in everybody's head.
Well, and I'll bet you that person couldn't tell you what Trump supposedly did that makes him a bad person. Or if they do tell you and you ask for any evidence, even a news article where it's stated that he did these things, they won't be able to provide it, because a lot of people have said things on social media and repeated narratives on social media for which there is zero evidence. And so everybody's mixed up on Trump.
Yeah,
but wild. I mean, and it all gets complicated by another factor. And this is one that really bothers me. The line between illegal and socially unacceptable is getting heavily blurred by politics. So there are things like there are things that I won't do because they're socially unacceptable. There are things that I don't do because I think they're mean, or I would feel like I was doing something to the other person that was wrong, or hurtful, or whatever. And I'm going to give an example, and I'm going to apologize if there's fans of the people involved in our audience. I know absolutely nothing about Gabby Hanna except that she's famous for being crazy.
Mhm.
But her name trended on Twitter the other day, and some people I follow were talking about it. So I looked at the crazy, and there was a guy who this is a Zoomer, right? So somebody that's not even, he didn't even look old enough to have attended 4 years of college and graduated. But he tracked down her real address, went to her house, and lied to get in to talk to her, and was wandering around inside of her house filming and streaming it on TikTok. And his reason he gave for this was that he thought he was going to help her, that everybody was worried about her. And the backstory that I know from having talked to both fans and critics of this woman is that she has some actual diagnosed mental health conditions, and she's had some public psychotic breaks. And there have been family members that have called for welfare checks, and the cops aren't doing anything. They're not getting satisfactory results, and they think that she's going to self-harm or put herself in a dangerous situation and fail to protect herself from a danger. And here she let a stranger, complete and utter stranger, into her house. Guy comes up to her door and asks to use the bathroom. She just let him in. And I wouldn't do that, male or female. Somebody came to my door that I didn't know and says, "Can I just use your bathroom?" I would point them to a public restroom,
I'm not even
because
opening the door.
yeah, you don't let strangers into your house. I don't let the people that come and talk about different electricity providers come into my house. I just don't. Even, most of the time I just tell them to go away, right? But this woman let a complete and utter stranger into her house, and his reasoning was really unsound. Now, millennials and Zoomers, a lot of them have been taught that wanting to do something and having good intentions makes anything you do good. But this guy clearly was not helping this woman by going into her home and broadcasting her breakdown, right? That was not benevolent. That was attention seeking. And what did everybody say? Clout chasing. So I guess she has a lot of followers. Like, she's probably a big YouTuber. But in any case, that wasn't good for her. And it was kind of hinky. Like, there were people saying, the guy should go to jail for this. Well, no, because she let him into her house. He did nothing illegal. That doesn't mean it's not criticizable. You can't criticize it. No, you can criticize that. That was really stupid. And the other thing is, if I knew somebody had a serious mental health condition and they were in the midst of a very public psychotic break, I would not go in their house. How stupid, right? You go into somebody's house that's in the middle of a psychotic break. You do not know what their perceptions are. You do not know if you're going to trigger them to go into a violent outburst. You do not know you're not going to be a victim of violence. You do not know that you're not going to make the situation worse for that person, right? You could be guilty of all kinds of social faux pas. You could be guilty of all kinds of harm, even if it's not illegal. And so, with regard to Harvey Weinstein, the situation that Hollywood set up for itself in terms of the casting couch and people being able to get ahead by engaging in sexual favors, and men and women were both subjected to this, and the child abuse that is documented to have taken place in Hollywood, that all deserves criticism. The question is, right? That guy going into Gabby Hanna's house didn't necessarily break any laws, doesn't need to go to jail. You can criticize him all you want, but demanding that he be charged for a crime because what he did was shitty is irrational and unreasonable. And we could even say, all right, so what Harvey Weinstein did, it was clearly unadvisable. Obviously, he put himself in danger because now he's being accused of rape, right? And obviously, whether or not someone is willing to sleep with you does not determine whether or not they are a good actor or actress. So he may have passed up some great talent because they wouldn't sleep with him. That's pretty dumb. Like, there's a whole bunch of things you can criticize about the casting couch, but calling it a crime, unless somebody was physically forced, rather than being able to go to some other company and offer their talents for a job with that company instead of with Weinstein, it's really hard for me to even call that discrimination or harassment. You just find out the guy that's not going to be a good boss. So you don't want to work for that guy, right? And there are all kinds of other circumstances that make someone a shitty boss. And most people, if they discover they have a shitty boss, they go to work for somebody else. They leave, right? They do something about the situation. But if the shitty boss wants to have sex with you, then all of a sudden that particular one issue, you can agree to do what the boss wants and then come back and play victim of it. I think that's it's really sexist. So, like, yeah, just because we are defending Harvey Weinstein's right to due process doesn't mean you can't criticize the casting couch system. And it's bad for men, and it's bad for women, and it's bad for art.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't make it criminal.
Yeah, I agree. Important distinction. That's ultimately what we're getting at. So, all right. So I'm going to read some super chats because I got a bunch. And then we'll continue the article. So Albert Nader Retro gives us $2 Canadian and says, Hannah Lauren, token guy. And then he gives us another $2 Canadian and says, that token guy gag brought to you care of Mel Magazine. Thank you. Meredith G gives us $5 and says, honey for the Badgers. Thank you, Meredith. Then Albert Nada Retro gives us $5 Canadian again and says, they've got Harvey on video demanding favors for movie roles. It doesn't mean he forced himself on anybody, but his name is mud and his rep is destroyed. Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, sure.
He'll never work in Hollywood again.
He'll
never work again.
He's like, what, 80?
He doesn't 70, have,
he's
yeah,
70.
He's 70. He doesn't have to, though. Like, he's gonna, he can just retire now. But, like, this is another thing, too, is that this Me Too thing is gonna make it look like Harvey is, like, the final boss of sexual harassment. And then if he's defeated, then it's gone. I want you to just, like, and again, no, yeah, I know, we're not, this is speculative. But do you really think that there's no longer a casting couch in Hollywood because Harvey Weinstein's not involved? Like, so like nothing. It doesn't change that much because the problem is a cultural problem within the entertainment industry. It's not like a problem with a man, which is what they're trying to present it as, right? It's not, oh, this one guy who clearly just hates women so much he wants to have sex with them. And if we can just get rid of him, then everything will be fine. No, it's a problem with the culture of Hollywood itself. And by extension, like I said, the entertainment industry at large. So we could, have whatever opinions we want on Harvey Weinstein. But all I'm saying is that behavior is not something that he created. And it doesn't go away if he goes away.
Yeah.
So, all right. The Manhattan District Attorney declined to comment on the appeal being granted. Doug Wigdor, who represented some of the victims at trial, called Weinstein a desperate man, but said that the court will ultimately reject his appeal and affirm the appeal court's well-reasoned decision affirming the trial court's conviction and sentence. Back in June, an intermediate level state appeals court upheld the rape and sexual assault conviction, rejecting the disgraced media mogul's appeal that time suggested, or that time, that's kind of a weird sentence, that suggested a judge unfairly tilted the outcome of his trial in favor of the prosecution. The unanimous ruling by a 5-justice appellate panel found the judge's actions were appropriate and did not warrant overturning Weinstein's 23-year sentence. And I saw that John Davis was in the chat, who's a lawyer that I've had on the show for a couple fireside chats. I think we talked about Weinstein. I know that we also talked about Bill Cosby. I remember that. And he said, it is frightening that the 5-judge panel unanimously upheld the conviction. Basically, by admitting the testimony of the other women, they forced him to defend against their accusations without any chance of having access to the evidence necessary to prove his innocence. The sole purpose of admitting the testimony of the other women was to prejudice the jury so that they would believe he is a rapist rather than that he committed rape in the case charged. So yeah, it goes back to what I was saying before. If several women come forward and they make allegations and that's allowed, then they can and then there's no, like, they don't have to prove anything, right? Now you don't see Harvey Weinstein as one man charged with one, count or one incident of rape. Now you're seeing him as a rapist that has done this to many women because of the number of women that have come forward. And I think that that does have an impact on the jury and what they're going to think. Yeah.
So this is something that can be, if men's rights activists gain enough influence, if you get enough of a libertarian or at the very least even-handed local and state government. Like Ohio has a law, and I don't know if it's gone now, but I know that it was law the last time I went to court with a falsely accused man. The law states that a man cannot be, or a person cannot be, because it's not very often that women are tried, but women do commit these crimes, cannot be convicted of a sex crime unless there is evidence besides the accuser's story. So in a situation like this, they might argue that other accusers' stories constitute evidence. It could be written into law that no allegations can confirm a sex crime, that there has to be other evidence besides verbal testimony. And in the case of the man that I went to court with, there was only verbal testimony. It's just that some of the verbal testimony was a former cop who was the security for his university campus. So basically, a rent-a-cop at that point, a campus cop, and the reason he was a campus cop and not, any longer a city of Dayton police officer was because he was fired for lying from the police department. So, and it doesn't matter what he was lying about. He was fired for lying, and so he's proved to be willing to lie when it suits him. Right? He testified that there was a confession. Now, there was no written confession. There was no recorded confession. In fact, there was no documentation whatsoever indicating that a confession ever existed. But he stated that the accused had verbally confessed to him to this crime. And the accused's state-appointed attorney refused to argue his case. His case was that the alleged incident never happened. The attorney instead argued that it was consensual. And the thing that made it really ridiculous was that the accusation was that with one hand, he pinned a woman who was taller than him, like 4 inches taller than him, by holding her hands over her head and pinning them with one hand. And then with his other hand, he was feeling her up. And with his other hand, he was fondling himself. So
What?
I counted, he had two hands, two, not three. This was not Zapod Beeblebrox. It was obviously not a true allegation. Either he had to take turns between two different things with one hand, and she had the opportunity to escape, or he had three hands, or the allegation was a lie. And no court caught that. Like, that went for 8 years and wasn't caught until I wrote about it and ridiculed it.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of like Mark Pearson, who was
Right.
accused of being able to stop time so that he
Right.
could, like, assault Sawad Fares, which I can say that name.
Yes, because we're not on Twitter.
We're not on Twitter, and we're not in the
Right.
UK. They made it illegal to say her name in the UK. But Sawad Fares, the actress from Game of Thrones that Mark Pearson supposedly, like, stopped time so that he could sexually assault her, and then
on CCTV, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, clearly he's just a much shorter man than he really looks like, and he's actually one of the time bandits.
Yeah.
But what my point in all this is it's obviously time for the movement to start a pressure campaign with politicians to strengthen due process. And it's local politicians. Your state can have a law that says what an evidentiary standard is, right? Your state can have a law that protects the rights of the accused and says there has to be evidence besides testimony. Someone can't just be convicted on a combination of an accusation and character testimony. It has to be more than that, right? Now, some people have been saying, well, there's video of him doing this. Okay, well, if there's video, then a law like that wouldn't prevent his conviction. A law like that wouldn't prevent somebody from being convicted when there was solid evidence that they committed the crime. It would only prevent somebody from being convicted if the entire body of evidence was, she said he did this, and these other people said he was a bad person.
Yeah. Essentially. All right, so we're at the end of this article, so let's finish it off here. So back in June, an intermediate level state appeals court upheld the rape and sexual assault conviction, rejecting the disgraced media mogul's appeal that the time that suggested a judge unfairly tilted the outcome of his trial in favor of the prosecution. The unanimous ruling by a 5-justice appellate panel found the judge's actions were appropriate and did not warrant overturning Weinstein's 23-year sentence. Weinstein was convicted in February of 2020 on 2 first-degree charges of committing a sexual act. Is that a charge? Committing a sexual act? And third-degree rape. He was sentenced to 23 years. Yeah, it might just be the way it's worded. He was sentenced to 23 years in a New York State prison. Weinstein is currently in a Los Angeles jail awaiting his trial scheduled for October the 7th.
Which makes me think that maybe all of this is coming about as so to postpone this trial happening in California, because they're saying that this appeal is going to be heard in 2023, which is not long away. It's right around the corner. And so what are they going to ship him off to California to stand trial for those charges, and then bring him back to New York to stand for these charges, for the appeal? I can't see that happening. I think they would courts have to coordinate with each other when you have a person who's convicted in multiple states, or, standing trial in multiple states. You have to coordinate with the other lawyers and the other judges because they have other cases. So I think maybe one of the things that it does this appeal might push back the hearing that's going to happen in California. I mean, come on, it's too close together. I mean, if they're starting in October, that's only 2 months before 2023. They didn't say exactly when, but even still, I can't see them starting a case and then having to go through this whole appeal thing. And I'm sure in one way or another that this appeal or the results of it might affect the case in California.
There's also a case in the UK.
Oh, Jesus.
So like there's also a case in the UK. Like he's been all over the world. I mean, but in terms of committing a sexual act, the writer accidentally a word. There's a
criminal sexual act.
Penal code. I don't see the number for it in
I
this,
have it.
but
I have it up on the screen.
Yeah,
It says, under the New York Penal Code, you have committed a criminal sexual act in the first degree if you do any of the following: engage in anal sex or oral sex with another person by forcible compulsion. Not sure what that.
Someone who's physically helpless.
Or you do the same thing.
And it probably goes
with
on to say drunk.
Yeah, who is physically helpless, like they're intoxicated.
So it's essentially sexual assault where it's not rape, because they probably define rape specifically as genital penetration with another genital.
Oh, as opposed to oral. Yeah. Okay, so what's forcible compulsion? Because that sounds like, maybe you're making a threat.
Well, I mean,
maybe you're threatening them, but you're not like physically,
forcible compulsion can be if you hold someone down, if you hold a gun on them and threaten to shoot them, if you beat them into submission, if you wrestle them until they can't move anymore. Forcible compulsion is you threatened or used force.
Yeah, or you threaten to use force. Like that. Well, I mean,
unless they have a section for coercion, and then threats of force are listed under that.
Yeah. Now, there was one of the audio recording leaks or something that was supposedly like the it was kind of like the smoking gun, or at least it's presented that way, where he's like talking to a woman, and he's essentially giving her instructions, and he's probably like, maybe you could read that his tone is a little like commanding, but I don't think that there's like necessarily a threat behind it. And of course, I believe that in that example, that woman did, whoever that was, she did do as she was asked, to my knowledge. So
well, there was a video that came out that everybody was like, oh, this is a smoking gun, and I watched it, and at the beginning of it, this woman sets up her camera and everything, and then he comes in and starts an interview with her and straight up asks her, can I flirt?
Mm-hmm.
And if she'd said no, that and he'd gone on and done it, or she'd said no and he was like, well, then you're not getting the interview, and then walked out, maybe there might have been some criticism there. But she said yes. She consented to the flirting. Yeah. And then she released this video like he had imposed on her when she had consented to the flirting. And at the time, I remember saying that, I'm like, you consented to the flirting. You cannot then come back and convince me that you are a victim of his efforts to flirt with you, because you said yes.
Yeah. And it's cringe that he even had to ask, but I think that he's probably like legitimately like, I should probably be careful here.
Oh, he's a feminist man.
Yeah.
He was abiding by the feminist standard.
Yeah. Exactly.
And feminists now have turned it around to getting permission to touch a woman is still sexual assault. I mean, they've said that about Trump. The phrase, they let you do it, is a statement about consent. Letting somebody do something is consenting. You know, when you let somebody do something because you like something about them and not because they're holding you down or pointing a gun at you or something like that, that's not, you're not a victim of that, right? That's you making choices based on your interests. And that statement was Trump acknowledging the fact that some women are such gold diggers that their sensibilities regarding what is polite or impolite behavior in a man are malleable depending on his size of his wallet or the size of his popularity or both. And I mean, that's been proved over and over again. That's flat out true. And the casting couch is just another example of that. It's just a shadier looking example because we have opinions about sexual promiscuity.
Yep. And of course, a lot of people will invoke their disgust with that when it works for them, but then like be all for it when it also works for them. So for example, a lot of these like actresses that have consented to do stuff on the casting couch will also be the ones to call the casting couch sexist, because now it's one of those things that, you know, you ridicule or you demonize because it's good for you to do that.
But they'll still use it to gatekeep the competition, and ensure their success.
Yeah, they'll still use it. All right. So anyway, that was the end of that article, and we still have some time. So do you want to look at another one? Vanity Fair. It might say similar things, or we could look at a different story. If you think we kind of covered this all right.
Yeah, I think all the rest of the articles are pretty much just condensed versions of the New York, the NBC.
Article, they're basically saying similar things.
This post-millennial article has something in it that actually is kind of interesting in terms of the Harvey Weinstein story, even though Harvey Weinstein isn't mentioned. So maybe we could take a look at that.
Maybe send me the link, post-millennial.
It is right below the first story she posted. I'm going to repost it here.
Yeah, go ahead and repost it.
There.
The trans prisoner. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this might be relevant. So, trans prisoner who impregnated 2 inmates tries to cut off testicles over being misgendered. Kind of wild.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little extreme. Biologically male prisoner. I like how is this like the new way we're going to navigate this? Biologically male prisoner Demi Minor, who impregnated 2 fellow inmates at a woman's prison in New Jersey, attempted to remove one of Minor's testicles with a razor blade after being misgendered following a transfer to an all-male youth facility. Minor, 27, was moved from Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women in Union Township, New Jersey, to the Garden State Youth Correctional Facility after reports of the pregnancies made headlines. Minor was a minor when the crimes were committed.
So real quick, I want to point out something, right? The first paragraph describes the incident, the person impregnated. I'm going to use the they them just because, like, I'll respect this person's transgender status based on their experience with it. They're being so upset that they try to commit suicide and everything. That indicates that there is a serious gender dysphoria going on there. And there are also some other serious mental health issues, which when somebody lands in the juvenile detention system, there's always issues behind it. Kids are generally not criminally bad, right? Unless something is wrong in their lives and or something is missing that they should have had, or they've got some sort of chemical mental health condition, right? But this does not say something that's very important. It does not say that Demi Minor imposed themselves
Yeah,
on
it doesn't
the fellow
say
inmate.
it doesn't say
Right.
he raped them. It says
Right.
he impregnated two fellow
Right.
inmates.
Two. Right.
Yes.
It doesn't say there was any sexual violation.
Right.
Now, how the heck does somebody not get monitored in juvenile detention to the point where they're able to have sex with a fellow inmate when they're underage? You would think that they would be protecting the kids from engaging in this, but actually, one of the things that we learned from surveys of prisoners at juvenile detention facilities is that at the female facilities, sexual misconduct between inmates is the most prevalent type of sexual misconduct, whereas in the male facilities, it's actually employees engaging in sexual misconduct with the people that they are supposed to be there to help. So it's important to make that distinction. This was not a rape, and it is an indication that they were not sufficiently monitored to prevent them from having sex. And it happened a second time before they finally moved the inmate to a different facility. And to solve the problem, they did the most politically incorrect thing they could think of, which is, in terms of encouraging underage kids to transition, I think that's bad as well. I think that this person didn't get the help that he needed when he was going through dysphoria, and now he's in a situation where he's a they, and he's very, very disturbed about it. And like just 2 paragraphs in, you can see that all of the adults in this situation failed these inmates very miserably.
Yeah. And well, I mean, the impregnation thing suggests, and this is something that not a lot of people seem to want to acknowledge, that maybe those women wanted to get pregnant or they wanted to have sex.
Yeah.
And because like the thing is, we're not learning about any assault or force. It's just impregnated 2 women. And if you think about it, if they're women that are also prison inmates, then they likely also have criminal histories because that's why they're there. And so why wouldn't they, again, have the same, I guess you could say, like, flaws that would lead them to do this. And the reason why I bring this up is that, like, I know that there's a lot of debate and discussion about trans women in women's spaces. It's like the big thing that everyone's fretting about, and it's mostly coming from the conservative side because they're trying to protect women from the dangerous men that are using the system to get into women's spaces so they can rape them. I don't think it's as clear cut as that, but that's the narrative that they put out. And so when I look at this story where there's like, a man who maybe he identified as a woman so he can get closer to women in prison, but the women in prison didn't have a problem getting close to this man because, again, that women also can be like sexually aggressive, I guess I'll put it that way, or at least, open to it. So this is another, like, it's a small thing really, but I don't think it's insignificant because there is like this, the way that it's often framed is that there's something inherently predatory about men. And this comes from both sides. And when you look at this particular situation, it's like, no, he wasn't raping anyone. There were women in prison and they wanted to bang. And so he banged them. So, like, I'm sorry, but yeah, women in prison are also not angels.
No.
Well, and again, this is in a juvenile facility, so these are probably people in their adolescence at a time when their hormones are raging. They're at the most likely to make dumb sexual choices.
Well, they both got pregnant. That's another thing.
And
Yeah.
I mean, all three of them made dumb sexual choices, right? It was a dumb sexual choice for Minor to have sex with these girls, and it was a dumb sexual choice for these girls to have sex with Minor. And it says later in the thing what his age was when he was jailed. But the reality is that this is something that they should have been protected from, and they weren't. So where, like, and I'm not saying just the girls, I mean all three of them should have been protected from this.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is an individual who has profound mental health issues, who is in there for being for violent crime,
A murder.
probably has a very awful backstory,
Yeah,
and is now a father.
Yeah, of two kids
Twice
from
over.
two different mamas. He actually
Mhm.
stabbed his former foster father to death.
That's the
the
next
crime
paragraph,
he's in.
right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Minor, who is serving a 30-year sentence for stabbing their former foster father to death, has since complained that they have been mistreated and abused at the new prison. Staff allegedly refused to acknowledge Minor's gender identity as a woman, according to the Daily Mail. Yeah, so went to jail for a serious violent crime. Yet there were still two women in there that wanted baby. So,
baby.
yeah,
Well,
I know.
and let's look at
baby.
this. People do not say things like that about their situation unless they've been taught that. So this is an individual that probably went to public school for at least a while, right? And we know what they've been teaching the students in public school. So in public school, Minor was taught that failure to use your pronouns is abuse, and
Yep.
was taught to feel trauma, to experience trauma from being told this is what is real, confirmed by science. What you perceive isn't real, right? And therefore we're not going to accommodate it, right? So Minor was taught, probably was groomed, honestly, in school, because we don't know how long that's been going on. We don't know if that just started when there was news reporting of it, or if it's been going on for a while. We do know that there were reports of it in Canada well before there were reports of it in the United States. So it may have been going on covertly for 10 years and we just didn't know it.
Oh, I bet it at least. I there was a woman named Gail Rubin, who was a feminist, that wrote about queering children through education. She wrote about it in the 1980s, and there's another guy named Paolo Fieri, I think. I'm probably butchering his last name, who wrote all about the same thing, like queering students through education. And he was like also from, I want to say, like it might have even been the 70s. But yeah, so I mean, I think we're learning about it now because it's like become, it's more of a like the people who advocate it are so certain that they're doing is right. They're not hiding it anymore. They're just putting it up front. I mean, like Disney employees are doing it. But I think that this has been going on for
a long time,
decades.
Right?
Yeah.
So this experience of gender dysphoria that Minor has had, may be chemical, and it may be imposed, which that's a horrible thing to impose on somebody. It's like making somebody, like, you wouldn't deliberately impose schizophrenia on somebody, right? You wouldn't deliberately impose anorexia on somebody. Dysphoria is a perception disorder. It is, you perceive yourself to be something that you physically are not, and it creates a level of cognitive dissonance that is profoundly disturbing to the individual, and it is traumatic. And I've seen people go through that trauma, and it's hell. So to impose it on somebody artificially would be an egregious level of abuse. It would be Hitler level abuse. to do that to people. It's torture, literal torture, psychological, not physical, until they start having surgeries, but it is torture to do that to somebody, right? Now, the other detail that might slip under people's radars. So his sentence, he was sentenced for stabbing his former foster father, not his biological father, not his stepfather, foster father. So this is a child who ended up in the foster care system. There are two ways that a child ends up in the foster care system. The child is abused and has to be removed from the abusive situation, and that abuse is traumatic, and that abuse can cause all kinds of trauma-induced mental health conditions, right? So that's one way. The other way is state kidnapping of a child who has not been abused, and they use the court systems, they use the child's services system to do that, the Child Protective Services system. And it is documented that this has happened, and it has happened quite a bit. Now, one of two things happened in the foster care system. Either there was a traumatized child placed in foster care who had mental health issues that were more profound than and more damaging than the assessors figured out, and had violent tendencies and stabbed a perfectly innocent foster father to death. The other possibility is that this person was abused within the foster system, and it might not even have been the foster father. It might have been the other kids, might have been the foster mother, might have been anybody. It also could have been the foster father, because a foster father is not your father. And you know, it's a rare thing even for the father to do it, but that happens as well. So either way, there are significant chances that this kid was abused and then pulled from the frying pan into the fire, and then convicted for acting on his trauma, instead of pulled from the fire and sent to a mental health institution where he should have been. They put him in a prison.
Yeah.
If he'd have been a girl, would they have done that? If he'd have been a girl and he cried out for help, would they have done that? Right? This is a boy who was punished for being a boy, for being a male victim, either of abuse or kidnapping, and then probably abuse again. And now he's identifying as a girl because he's been indoctrinated in the school system with this ideology that says your escape from the standards of the heavy standards of masculinity is identifying as female, right? And the dysphoria that's been imposed, and probably the charade that he has to live every day, in addition to having experienced the abuse, has to have been hugely damaging. And then he found two girls that showed him affection. Like, what do you expect him to do? Of course he's going to make a profoundly stupid decision.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Well, I can't argue with any of that. Not that I would want to. So I guess he was jailed when he was 16. Started to transition in 2020 and was transferred out of the male prison system to Mahan. This transfer came less than a year after the ACLU brought a suit against the state, demanding that they allow biological male inmates who self-identify as women access to women's prisons when minor impregnated to female prisoners. Mahan says that the relationships were consensual, which I think that sounds right. That sounds like they
That's
were.
the prison.
Yeah.
Like, if they wanted to go after him, they would not say that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I don't think they could, because it's probably likely that the women he slept with would have agreed that it was consensual. There is something else, though, I was thinking about just now. I remember another story that we covered where we learned that there was a boy in, I think it was like a juvenile facility, and the boy had, the facility essentially diagnosed him with severe, like, violent outbursts, and decided that the best solution was to essentially put him on estrogen, and I think that's what it was, and he ended up growing breasts because of like how much he was on, and it was intended to essentially like calm him down. Do you guys remember when we covered that? That there was like this guy, and he was like in.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay, the reason why I bring that up is I wonder how much gender, like the
Dysphoria.
queer theory, gender, like experimentation, and other kinds of like ways to essentially turn men into women in these facilities. I wonder if it's not maybe just that this guy discovered he was a woman, but is it possible that he's, being like made to think it? Because when he
Well, yeah.
initially went to jail, right, he didn't start transitioning until 4 years later. And when I think
It's
about
very possible that they gave
yeah,
him estrogen prior. Yeah.
yeah, and maybe even through like I don't know, therapy sessions or whatever, like a person, a social worker could have convinced him or got him to consider, living as a woman. And I mean, like, again, they did this to male inmates at, juvenile correction facilities. And they gave them enough of this, like, hormone therapy essentially, to where they grow breasts. And I remember the one guy who the story was originally about. I mean, he experienced a lot of bullies from because they didn't move him to a girls' prison; they left him with the boys. And so you have this boy, and he's got tits, and he's like in a juvie facility with a bunch of other boys. What do you think is going to happen? So
Right.
Yeah.
he was bullied and all kinds of stuff.
Well, here's the thing. You get inundated in the public school system with messages about basically politically correct woke conversion therapy messages, right? You get inundated with that in school. This idea that it's normal to identify as the opposite sex, that there's no biological reality, that if you feel a certain way, that's the way it is. And then you get put into a closed environment and dosed with something like estrogen, and you also have heard all your life that men's prisons are much more harsh than women's prisons. So you're in an environment that if you were maybe to be able to get into the other environment, you feel like you might have an easier time. And then on top of all of that, you're dealing with all of the trauma that you've grown up with. Like, the most likely thing to happen is your next step would be identifying as a female, hoping to get into that easier environment, hoping that you're right about your feelings defining who and what you are. And then when you end up there, you discover, well, actually you're still attracted to females.
Yeah. And it's not as easy to be a female as it looks like on the poster.
yeah.
It's much harder to be a woman on the inside than it is to be on the inside of a woman. But you do have to be somewhat hard to get there.
I found the article from that old story. So a 16-year-old boy being held in a Los Angeles County juvenile hall developed enlarged breasts after he was prescribed estrogen to treat a behavioral disorder, a move that baffled doctors who said that the treatment defied medical logic, according to a lawsuit filed last month. Which sounds like bullshit, because if you give a guy estrogen, it's going to change him. Don't act surprised. The teen, whose identity is being withheld because of his age, was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD, 2 days after he was arrested and housed at Eastlake Juvenile Hall in June of 2019, the lawsuit said. Medical records reviewed by the Times show that the teen's testosterone levels were slightly high when the doctor who diagnosed him prescribed daily doses of estrogen. So essentially, they blamed testosterone for his ODD, his oppositional defiant disorder. and they decided, well, what's the solution to too much masculinity? Femininity. And so they gave him estrogen. And by the way, estrogen does not make like is not like the anti-aggression hormone. It's not the
No,
That's
it's
for
not
sure.
the yeah, it's not the peaceful like let's all get along hormone at all.
kumbaya.
Like
No.
yeah, it's not that. No. So that's like just bad logic right off the bat. Um so yeah, and of course they claim that estrogen, it says estrogen regulates the development of female sexual characteristics and reproduction. Men produce the hormone at much lower levels. Well, yeah, I mean, just like women produce much less testosterone, but obviously, we both have both, but men have more of one and women have a lot more of the other.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and the other thing is oppositional defiant disorder. That is, it's like attention deficit disorder in that sometimes it's legitimately diagnosed. Sometimes an individual is diagnosed with it when actually they just need discipline, and guidance and mentoring.
Mm.
And sometimes a person gets diagnosed with it by a bully who is essentially being authoritarian and unreasonable, and using the individual's objections to being bullied as evidence that they have this disorder. And the symptoms can include having temper tantrums frequently, arguing a lot with adults, refusing to do what an adult asks, always questioning rules and refusing to follow rules, doing things to annoy or upset others, including adults. So if an adult is annoyed with you a lot, you can get diagnosed with this. Blaming others for the child's own misbehaviors or mistakes, being easily annoyed by others, often having an angry attitude, speaking harshly or unkindly, and seeking revenge or being vindictive. Well, an individual who is being bullied or being abused is going to have frequent outbursts. They're going to defend themselves, right? They're going to be defensive when they are ordered to do something that the order itself is abusive. If somebody is being sexually abused, they might refuse to do what the adult abusing them asks. If the rules are basically that they can't exist without upsetting somebody, if the rules are different for that person than they are for other people, or if the rules put them in danger, things like that, they're going to question that, right? If they're told they're not allowed to eat, if they're told they're not allowed to to wear clothes, if they're told they're not allowed to sleep, anything like that, right? Or if they're restricted in other ways that are completely unreasonable. So if they're living with an abuser, they might get diagnosed with that because the abuser is painting them as a defiant person for refusing to be abused, and that doing things that annoy or upset others. So an individual with a personality where they march to the beat of a different drum and it's dissonant to the drums of everyone else in the house can get diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder if they don't change their whole personality to suit the people in the household. And that might be, say, a black kid put in a white household, especially an urban black kid put in a white household in a country setting where everything is different from everything he grew up around. Huck Finn in the Widow Douglas's household. Like, a kid that was homeless, right, put into the household of a middle class woman who has already reached old age and has a totally different outlook on life. Blaming others for the child's own misbehaviors. Well, he hit me first. Well, maybe he did, right? Blaming others for the child's own mistakes. You said I should do this and I did it. Now you're mad at me, right? Being easily annoyed by others. If others are doing things to annoy the individual, he doesn't get the same consideration that others are supposed to get when he's doing things to annoy or upset them. Speaking harshly or unkindly, having an angry attitude. If you're abused, you're going to have an angry attitude about it, and you're going to speak about it in harsh or unkind terms. And again, an urban black kid being put into a home in a country setting, right? Being in a totally different environment that he's accustomed to, may have a very different way of speaking than the other members of the household are used to. And it may take him a while to learn to speak the local language. Even if it's English, it's not going to be the same kind of slang. He may have grown up in an environment where cussing was normal and not cussing was abnormal, and be dropped into an environment where cussing is a sign of lower intelligence, or cussing is a sign of hostility, right? And that if there's no tolerance for that difference, and for him to have a learning curve with that, he may be diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. And defending yourself in a fight, or waiting for the right moment to show somebody that they can't bully you because you're going to get back at them later, that can get you diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. So we don't know if this guy really had the disorder, or if he was diagnosed because he was dropped into an alien environment and expected to immediately and profoundly adapt.
Yeah, that could present a challenge, just a little bit.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're coming up on the hour, so I'm gonna have to call it. But do you guys have any final thoughts on either this story about the trans prisoner, or the Harvey Weinstein appeal?
I'll say, as far as Harvey Weinstein, I haven't heard much about it on Twitter. I haven't seen people really talking about it, but holy shit, if this guy actually manages to get this thing overturned, or even if it just goes back to trial, it's the screeching is going to commence all over again.
Yeah, people are lose there. It's going to be absolutely insane. And that's kind of why I hope it happens.
Yeah.
What I really just want is to be secure in the knowledge that this was treated fairly.
Yeah.
Because all of the noise and all of the advocacy and the hashtags and the crying and whining, it's so it's intended to be distracting, and it's intended to be emotionally manipulative, and I don't want that to work. So I want it to just come down to truth. If the truth is that this guy's guilty, then we have a system in place for it. He should deal with the consequences of his actions, and that's the end of it. We don't even have to bring it back up again. We don't have to make this about, oh, this is evidence that society has a problem with women. And no, this guy, if we find out he's guilty and we have evidence, then we punish the person who committed the crime, and that's the end. It doesn't say anything about men in general. It doesn't say anything about patriarchy. None of that. So sorry, feminists, but in my mind, even if you win, you lose, because what you really want to do is you want to make this about men everywhere. This isn't this Harvey Weinstein is a symbol. That's all it is. If they can make him the bad guy, then they make all men the bad guy. That's basically going to define every professional relationship between men and women for until this country falls apart completely. And that's the thing that I don't want. So what I want is for this to follow due process. I want it to be really costly for women and other accusers to essentially just for them to just throw allegations out there to skew things. And I want it to only focus on the evidence, period. That's all. And I think that if we and this is actually I'm calling for our for us to do that in a cultural sense, so that people aren't simply putting their 2 cents in, and they're not focused on the importance of the evidence, because it's just so easy to get wrapped up in the bullshit. And that same thing goes for all other people who've been alleged to have done things, and we haven't really like seen the cases through. So you know Johnny Depp, which I know that he won his case, but they're not going to stop trying to spin this. Marilyn Manson, who's currently going through something. Now Brad Pitt, and even like Bill Cosby. That's not over yet. Also, trying to get an appeal. So just don't let people, I guess, like drive home their version of the narrative, because I don't think it's a good idea. Those are my thoughts.
When it comes to the two stories, I don't have anything to say about the Weinstein story that you guys haven't already said. I think the second story, all of the problems in this story that took place after the kids' incarceration could have been addressed and potentially solved if juvenile criminal perpetration was treated primarily as a psychological health and development issue, as opposed to a criminal intent and character issue.
Right.
And you can treat that from a perspective of also approaching it with the intent of protecting the community's security. But I think a lot of the criminal justice system exists and ends up being needed because we fail at the juvenile justice system level, and young people like this end up getting completely and utterly destroyed. And this young man, and he's 27 years old now, and he's experiencing profound gender dysphoria. He's a they at this point. He's tried to cut off his own testicles, and he's a father, and he's never going to have, for the rest of his life, is never going to have an emotionally healthy outlook, unless, how do you reconcile being a father with experiencing the level of dysphoria that's indicated in this story? And the justice system is not going to help with that. The justice system is going to do nothing but reinforce a sense of having the whole world against minor.
Mhm.
And that's not going to help. So let's say minor comes up for parole at some point well before the 30 years, because that happens, and gets dumped out into society. What chance does this individual have in normal society? What chance is there that Demi Minor is going to walk out of the prison system, go somewhere, get a job, pay rent, go to the movies, and enjoy a social life with people, and parent two children, whether in wherever they are? They may have already been taken into the foster system, or will be when they're born. Who knows how the state handles that? What are the chances this person has at just an ordinary life, much less a good life? And what are the chances that a community this person gets dumped into has of escaping another violent incident, when the state is doing everything that is geared toward creating a monster instead of helping this individual develop into a healthy, capable adult that can be part of a community?
All right. I guess now we'll wrap it up here. Let me just make sure that I didn't miss any super chows. That I always have a problem with that, or I miss it. Super chows, nothing yet. So, all right, and no Rumble rants. Checking that as well. I see you, Shadow Wolf 87. Thank you for joining us on Rumble. All right, so yeah, it looks like we're gonna close out the show here. Please, guys, let us know what you guys think about the articles, and what do you think the odds are that Harvey Weinstein will get, you know, like maybe I don't know about a complete overturn, but at least like a chance to sort of redo trial. And what are your thoughts about everything else we discussed? Let us know in the comment section. Albert Nader Retro gives us $2 Canadian and says, "Good night, folks." Thank you, Albert. If you guys like this video, please smash that like button. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications so you know when our shows go live. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you guys think about what we discussed in the show today. And most importantly, please share this video because sharing is caring. Thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of HBR Talk. And we will talk to you all in the next video. Have a good one, everybody.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.